It was dark when a young lady wearing a clock traveled to a spot called Dolores. There she met a male escort and gave him a bag full of money. The greed in his eyes was obvious. The lady questioned if this amount would be sufficient for her to monopolize Gigolo. The male escort nodded and guided her the way, adding that Gigolo was at the end of the corridor and that she should enjoy her time. She entered the corridor where she could hear voices of people who were making love. She blushed and thought whether she was doing the right thing or not. She made her mind that she should have a lover too. She clenched her fist and drew the curtains of the room where Gigolo was supposed to be. There she saw Gigolo was already with another woman. That woman screamed, "What the hell is going on?" And who was she? Louise said was that the place where the Empire Best Gigolo was? She made her mind to went along with the idea of an ideal arranged marriage, Reyard. She didn't want to do so. From the beginning, the scene moved to a magnificent mansion, where Louise was getting ready in front of a mirror in her room. She questioned her maid if Reyard would like her in that dress or not. The maid enthusiastically said, "Of course. You look stunning, dear lady." Louise detected the sound of Reyard and raced straight towards him. She greeted him warmly and compassionately, asking how the fief was. Louise and Reyard got married, and he returned after a few months in his Eve. However, Louise got paled when she discovered that Reyard was not alone. He was accompanied by a lady. Reyard stated that she was a new hire. His hands were over her shoulders, which made Louise extremely uncomfortable. At the stroke of the midnight, Louise was roaming alone in the corridors of her mansion, getting worried about what happened in the morning. She couldn't shake off the feelings of unease that had been gnawing at her since Reyard's introduced that mysterious girl. He met that woman on his way to capital as her belongings got stolen and she needed a place to stay, so he invited her to his home as he couldn't leave a helpless lady on the streets. She was wondering whether she being a little more sensitive, as on asking that lady she already confirmed that she was capital to find her mother and siblings, and she would leave as soon as she found a place to live. Louise became convinced as she reminded Louise of her own history when she was selling fish on the streets. For some reason, her bucket of fish dropped into the mud. She was struggling at the time since it was essential to sell the fish. It was at that point when she first noticed Reyard. He confronted her and told her not to worry since he was willing to pay for her loss. She made up her mind to cooperate with that lady because she was in her situation as well, and it must have been difficult for Reyard to ignore her sorrow because he enjoyed helping others. She couldn't finish her thoughts as she heard voices in her yard. There she noticed Reyard and that lady hanging around in the middle of the night. Reyard not only put his hands towards her shoulder but also kissed her passionately. Louise saw everything from her balcony. She was so shocked that her body started trembling. She couldn't believe of what she was witnessing. The next morning, when Louise was having her breakfast with Reyard, she was completely zoned out because of the last night incident. Reyard was still so kind towards her, like always, as if nothing was different. Louise started doubting herself whether she imagined what happened the last night or what. Because Reyard was acting as gentle as he was. She thought maybe that hire misunderstood her kindness and made a move on her, but she was certain that Reyard also kissed her. She couldn't imagine that. She was trembling with fear and a lot of questions were popping in her head, like why would he do that? How could he do that? Did he get bored of her? She made her mind to talk about this matter with Reyard, but in the hallway she again saw Reyard with that new hire. She nervously asked how he could do that to her, as just a second ago Reyard said he loved her. Reyard sighs and hold her hands while saying, "Louise, I love you the most, but they should respect each other's private life." In fact, she could live her life the way she wanted to. That rang bells in Louise's mind as she suddenly remembered signing a contract before marriage stating something like private life. "And so this was what you meant," she murmured, trembling. In that tense moment, Reyard held her hand tightly and asked her if she remembered the terms of their contract. He warned her if she interferes in his personal space, their marriage would be over. She flinched and regretted that she didn't have any other choice, and she couldn't bear the thought of going back to her prior life. She still wanted to trust the person who offered her help in her most difficult moment of life. She had no choice but to agree what he wanted. Reyard knew she would understand him, and he continued to be kind towards her. Reyard once brought some flowers for Louise as those were her favorite flowers and reminded him of hers. That time he brought Haena with him to his mansion. He brought so many mistresses to his mansion that Louise lost track of them. It was so frequent that Louise got accustomed to his actions. One day Reyard even asked whether she was comfortable around his mistresses or not. Louise jokingly said of course she was his only wife at least. Just like that, 3 years were passed. Louise found herself standing in her garden, taking the moment to bask in the warm sunshine. There she overheard the conversation between 2 maids of the mansion. They were talking about the absence of heir, and that wasn't strange at all as their lord was always seeing out for other mistresses. They wouldn't be surprised if one day their lord came home with a bastard, and if that day ever came then Louise would be forced to leave the mansion. Louise clenched her fist while worrying about that day. That night at the dinner table, Louise asked Reyard wasn't it the right time for them to have an heir? Reyard didn't show any interest in that, stating an heir wasn't mandatory at all. She tried to persuade him that without an heir Cloet family line might end at this rate. Reyard said she would be having troubles if they had an heir. He wanted them to be happy, just like they were. Louise wondered if she was happy at all as he left for his meeting without even realizing the fact that it was their wedding anniversary day. As the day passed, and in the evening Louise thought about going outside as she felt suffocated in that large mansion. Despite the luxurious surroundings and all the amenities at her disposal, she couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness and loneliness that had been haunting her for quite some time. She wanted a human company, but at the same time the thought of interacting with others made her feel more isolated. That was the only reason she preferred staying in mansion and not interacting with other people. After much consideration, she decided to move out of the mansion for a walk, and it wasn't long enough when it started raining heavily as the weather was overcast already. She was so disturbed that she preferred to stay in the rain for a while. She was so lost in her thoughts that her eyes welled up with tears after recalling instances where she heard the conversation of Reyard and his friend where they were making fun of his wife that she wouldn't do anything about the fact that his husband bring mistresses to his house. His friend said he should have listened to Reyard when he asked him to marry a woman from an unknown family, like he did. She was lost in herself that she walked so long in that heavy rain until her teeth started to chatter. She felt cold and started to wonder how far she had come as there was nothing nearby. She was in the outskirts of the empire and saw an old house in the distance. It appeared to her that the house was abandoned for years. She hesitated for a moment before she decided to approach it. She slowly made her way to the front door and pushed it open. There she saw a man who was extremely wounded and was in so much pain as his shoulder was bleeding badly. She immediately approached to help that man. He lost so much blood that he needed an emergency treatment. Louise removed her gloves to treat his wound, but the moment she tried to see his wound, he instantly grabbed her hands, asking, "Who are you?" The way that man grabbed Louise's hand, it made her blush and felt nervous. In that tensed moment, that man questioned Louise while looking right into her eyes that who was she? But his consciousness was fading away. Louise was worried about him while in the very next moment he passed out right over her. Louise wasn't expecting that at all and screamed, "Please get up." The moment when that man woke up, he saw a girl in silver hair. She asked, was he feeling any better now? He got stunned while looking at her beauty. She treated him lightly as his wound wasn't as deep as she thought. She didn't have enough medicine at that moment, but that emergency treatment should be enough to buy him some time. Louise was blushing while remembering the moment when that man fell over her. The man couldn't help but felt a sense of suspicion as her skill of treating the wound was better than most of the knights that he encountered. Despite the doubts, he couldn't deny the fact that she did an excellent job and began to feel a sense of gratitude towards her. He noticed that she even had torn her expensive clothes for his treatment. But she didn't have a choice as it was an emergency and the cloth wasn't dirty at all. He smirked as he didn't meet a woman before who was willing to ruin her clothes to help a stranger. Louise noticed that the man was laughing and he asked him to not do that as he might burst the wound back open. He then thanked her for saving his life and asked forgiveness for his early offense. Louise was in a hurry as his husband was about to come home, so she decided to leave. That man stood next to her and asked wasn't she going to ask why he was in such state. But Louise showed no interest in that and told him that it was none of her business and she would appreciate if he would not mention about this incident to anyone. And just like that, she said goodbye and parted ways with him with a little sense of feeling that she had seen that guy somewhere before. The next day, Reyard got worried as he heard from the servants that Louise came home wet yesterday and her clothes were torn off. He asked her about yesterday's incident. Louise said she didn't expect the rain and her clothes were too heavy to walk all the way back home in. In the conversation between Reyard and Louise, he expressed his concern of her walking in the rain so casually, as she was a noble and he didn't want her to get sick. He also mentioned that he felt ashamed that he forgot their wedding, and he would appreciate if she would have reminded him beforehand. He further mentioned that if this incident hurt her that much, then she should have told him, as it would have hurt him too. Louise said she was fine and asked what perfume was he wearing. Good that she mentioned Reyard, as there was an important ball because society would be changing in ways as His Grace Duke Lindemann was about to return. He was on a patrol of the Peril Forest, and none of the night had managed to patrol that forest for that long and return alive. There were also rumors that he had lost less than half of his knights too. Louise remembered that the man she treated yesterday was none other than Edward von Lindemann, the crowned king who was deposed. 1 year ago, he left to patrol the Peril Forest, which was also known as the Forest of Death under imperial orders. That order turned into a gossip den, as Peril Forest had been surrounded in darkness since the dragon living there was killed 30 years ago. After that, an endless stream of strange events occurred as the beast living there took on a strange form, and some of them even learnt how to use magic. Knight orders who were sent there under the pretense of patrolling didn't return alive. It was evident to everyone that the emperor was getting rid of the deposed crown prince, as he wanted the thorn to his side. However, a year later, he not only returned alive, but also he came back with more than half of his knight. Louise was wondering whether he got that wound in the Peril Forest or what, and what was he doing there anyway. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear Reyard calling her name. Reyard told her to be careful of him, as he played with all sort of women, from nobles to married wives. Apparently, he seduced those women to use them as materials for his black magic, and Reyard trusted that his wife was smart enough to not get involved with such a dangerous man. Louise nodded and said whatever, it has nothing to do with her. She was thinking that she only saw His Grace Lindemann from afar at every ball and banquet. It was the last night only when she saw him properly. There wouldn't be any reason for them to talk each other like that again. She couldn't be any wrong, as in the ball Duke Lindemann recognized her by the name Countess Cloet. Reyard was surprised to know about the fact that Ducal Lindemann knew his wife. After many years, Duke Lordman had returned to the realm, and the monarch had thrown a ball to commemorate his safe homecoming. The Duke found it hard to accept that the monarch had made all of these preparations on his behalf. All of it was a result of the Duke's expedition being ordered by the monarch. The king's expression turned sly, as though he did not intend to see the Duke go home. The monarch was notified yesterday night that the Duke had suffered severe injuries, despite the fact that he appeared perfectly well. The Duke declared he would love this lavish feast that the king was throwing. They smiled at one another, as though they wanted to say something but couldn't. Edward was the current emperor's stepbrother, the Duke Lordman, who had gained the title of imperial prince by unscrupulous ways. He has been sending assassins for Edward's life for years. Edward, though, made it through every attempt. By hiring people on the basis of their abilities rather than their status, he produced the best knights in the empire. Moreover, he increased his influence by strengthening his foundation, growing charitable organizations, and doing a lot more in place of entering politics. The emperor had dispatched the Duke and his order of knights to Peril's Forest because he felt threatened, and when he returned triumphant, the emperor's hatred for the Duke reached unfathomable heights. The monarch had made multiple attempts to kill the Duke, but after each failed, he felt the need to inflict more damage. Everyone, even Count Cloet, praised the Duke on his safe return from the perilous woodland. The Duke expressed gratitude to him for his remarks and attendance at his events. He noticed someone while he was speaking with the Countess Cloet appeared to be someone he knew. The Countess remembered him, remembered their intimate meeting in secret. She wanted the Duke to keep quiet since she didn't want the Count to know about their encounter because she thought he would be offended and misunderstood. Although Duke just acknowledged her as the well-known Countess, his face lit up as he thought of her. The Count took over and thanked the Duke for the compliment, leaving her bewildered. With sheepish expressions on their faces, they both wondered why the Count would act as though they knew one another, while the Count questioned why the Duke would identify his wife as the well-known Countess. They exchanged fast looks and uncomfortable, condemning looks. Lady Liliana called for the Count Reyard as they carried on with their game. Both of them were anticipating Liliana's arrival. It was only recently that she was presented to the elite. The Count presented Liliana to all of them. They spoke back and forth, and she was overjoyed to see the Duke, who had returned home safely. Count made an effort to talk to Liliana and paint her in a positive light. He even requested the Count if he may tell the woman a few of his powerfully epic tales from the Perils Forest. Everyone was concerned about the Countess as she didn't seem happy with the direction the talks were taking, and thus made an excuse to leave the room. It was Katie Cloet who originally inquired, how she insisted on obtaining a little sleep and rejected any assistance. Before the Count could offer to escort the Countess, Liliana clasped his hands as if to warn him against it. The Countess was furious at the idea of the ladies holding his hand and at his impudence in asking her to accompany him. Disappointed, she turned to depart when Edward, acting on her permission, offered to escort Lady Cloet or Louise. The Count sensed something was wrong because he had never seen the Duke escort someone, while Cloet was perplexed by the abrupt request from the Duke. Reyard dismissed it, tried to probe further, and informed the Duke that he was ready to go as well. However, Cloet assured him that she would be fine on her own and wouldn't want an escort. Since they were uncomfortable, she thanked them. It would be more comfortable for her to leave on her own. The Duke was at ease in that manner, if that was her intention. Cunning Liliana asked to go with Count Reyard. As Louise left by herself, Edward took a quick look at her. Two males were battling with the guards outside the ballroom door in an attempt to get in. This guard was impeding their access, so they started bugging him. They appeared to be commoners making verbal overtures to the guards. However, the guard had had enough of everything already. Despite his best efforts, he continued to believe that they were the only ones like them. The troops carried out the Duke's tasks, but the guard was doing what he was told. He wished to avoid trouble. Hethys chant. Louise was leaving when she observed a tall, robe-clad guard wrestling with the two men someone she knew. Maxian was the one. She gave him a startled greeting, and Maxian felt the same way. For 6 years, Louise had not seen Maxian. Maxian appeared enthralled with her, even though they were both grinning at each other. Without giving it a second thought, he blushed as she drew nearer to him and inquired about her well-being. Maxian was unaware that Louise had been married for 3 years, so when she informed him about it, he had no idea what to think. The fact that her true life did not align with her rank as a countess more than grossed out any of the guys. He was his boyhood pal, she told them. As talk of this subject gained traction, the rumors that she was of common origin began to spread, and in the wake of this episode, people came to believe that it was genuine. He reasoned that like birds, they do flock together. The men harbored vile suspicions regarding the lady's sincerity and uniqueness. He surmised that, based on what she had said, he might be more than just a friend, perhaps even someone significant. Louise was the daughter, the Countess of the Cloet family, which was a pillar of the imperial faction. They simply said, "Good evening," and walked out, reasoning that it would be counterproductive to insult her. Maxian praised Louise for saving him from those people as the guys were running away. He grieved that Mixon had been distracted by all of it and questioned how she became a countess without telling him. While engaging in self-promotion, Maxian informed her that he had served in the Grand Officer position in the Order of Knights of Greece. He had developed into an incredible person, in her opinion. She inquired if he was there fighting in the Forest of Perils with the knights with a hint of hesitation on her part. Maxian gave a nod of approval. She abruptly shifted the subject and inquired about his house's state. Maxian's response was as excellent as ever. She asked him if he had visited it, and he had, having been taken aback by his response when he realized that Louise had vanished. She would love to present Maxian to her spouse and extended a warm invitation to her new home. As they were discussing what had been going on in their lives, Edward, the commander, contacted Maxian. Louise let out a cry as he got closer. Out of sheer compassion, he had come to find him, but he was surprised to see Lady Cloet, he cried. He went on to say that he had come to look for Maxian, not to follow. He finished the phrase with a shrug. Louise looked away awkwardly and didn't say anything to get him to explain. Louise turned to look at the Duke just as she was about to depart. He said that it's not good for her to move around. Louise smiled and thought that instead of appearing so selfless, he needed to be concerned about himself. In response, he asked how she could act worried one moment and treats him like a stranger the next. He was completely plastered with that sheepish look. Louise became silent and was unable to answer. While they were saying their goodbyes, the Duke peered into their souls and asked to stay in touch. Maxian felt uneasy between the two of them. Edward inquired as Louise left whether the two of them knew one another. The fact that Louise and Maxian were childhood friends escaped his notice. Maxian inquired as to whether he knew Lady Cloet in return. With a sly smile, the Duke replied that he wasn't, adding that he had only recently become friends. They kept extending their welcomes and spoke even more. While conversing, Louise looked over to check if Duke was trailing her. She rushed to get away. When Maxian and Edward were playing chess, Edward seemed to be thinking a lot. Maxian won, but he did not care because all he was concerned with was something Maxian didn't know. He gave Maxian plaudits for his skills, saying they had grown significantly. He retorted that Edward wasn't lacking competence, rather, his attention was elsewhere, and he wasn't paying attention to the game. Maxian was visiting Cloet's house when he was on duty on Tuesday. He inquired as to what made the Countess stand out in her recent movements and what kind of personality she has. It had been a while, nearly 10 years since Maxian and Louise had met, so he was surprised by the question, which was challenging in the extreme. Edward instructed him to share everything he could recall. A warm smile appeared on Maxian's face as he considered it. He took a while to respond, stating that she was a kind person who was somewhat similar to him. He believed that Louise hadn't changed, she still had the same beauty as she did 10 years earlier. Commander tweaked Maxim's leg, told him Louise sounded like him, and that the description would offend someone. Startled by his admission, Maxian gave him the order to discard anything that seemed to annoy him. He cautioned about throwing your defenses down due to familiarity. He looked over at Edward as Maxian passed through and believed he had never seen Maxian smile so much. Maxian wondered why he had suddenly started looking for Louise. Edward began to reflect on his stay in the forest and whether or not the Emperor had indeed dispatched assassins to kill him. As reinforcements attacked his knights, the soldiers also referred to themselves as such. There, he lay wounded, and on the final day, even his loyal subordinate turned against him. That was when Lady Cloet made her appearance. He believed her to be a spy working for the Imperial faction. However, he didn't find anything particularly noteworthy about her. She was a countess who struggles to fit in with society. She genuinely tore off her dress slip in order to care for him. This would only have been typical if she had experienced comparable circumstances. What was she doing close to the Reyard, he wondered. All he could surmise was that it might be the Emperor's ploy, but the way the Countess responded made him feel as though she didn't know his rank and only discovered it much later. He was not persuaded as to why she had instructed him to keep it a private discussion and to tell no one else about the care she had given her. What she was hiding, he wondered, and her identity consumed him completely. The maid questioned Louise's preference, but she believed that her dress was far superior than most of her selections as she prepared for the ball. Louise had picked out a basic yet elegant garment. It filled her with recollections of her past and its experiences. After getting dressed, She hurried downstairs to greet her visitor. Maxian was the one. Placing his horse in the stable was Maxian's task. Louise gave him a warm welcome and thanked her for the invitation. They had been apart for a full decade, so they had a lot of catching up to do. Louise was incredibly kind and modest. She knew Maxian loved apple pie, so she had prepared it ahead of time to surprise him. She also had no idea what would be his new favorite thing. Maxian was obviously happy to see his favorite dish. He swallowed his spit as he relished apple pie to the same extent as before. It was excellent, and Louise was pleased to watch him relishing every bite. He had matured. She recalled the two of them playing home when they were younger after all. Growing up was an interesting experience. She began to ask questions. It had been a while since Louise had wondered about those. She inquired as to how he became a member of His Grace's Order of Knights. While rushing home, he was employed as a knight on the spot and coincidentally ran across him on his fief. They had both met in danger years ago. Now that he had changed roles, he looked much better, and Maxian began to wonder as well. When he inquired about her well-being, Louise began to falter. She began to change the subject by praising her husband for being present. Maxian anticipated that Count Reyard would treat her well since, as a noble woman par excellence, she deserved it. She tensed up after hearing this. Although she appeared to be talking about something else, she acknowledged him. She had interesting and humorous conversations. She boasted of her gardening endeavors and expressed her desire to show him how Louise and Maxian approached the garden. It was beginning to look like it could rain. Even if it did, it wouldn't matter because they can choose to have rain protection wherever. Despite being aware of the weather, she was nonetheless eager to take a walk. Maxian thought it was more stupid than cute. Their umbrella shattered and it began to pour, as if the coincidence wasn't accidental. They moved in closer, exchanging the umbrella. They bolted as soon as they spotted a shed out in the distance. They felt like children again, enjoying the rain, laughing, and chasing each other. Despite being wet and drenched, they both had smiles on their faces. The shed was a serene, lovely spot to take in the scenery and the rain. There was a tone to it. He asked abruptly about Master, hoping to meet him, but she informed him those 5 years prior, he had returned to the embrace of nature. Maxian indulged in self-pity. His circumstances prevented him from spending time with him as he desired. He had to depart, but now they've met. It doesn't matter because it's all in the past. As she went on, she reflected on how foolishly she had believed that having Reyard by her side would improve the way she felt. She was trying desperately to keep her feelings and words hidden from view, but deep down she knew that someone needed to hear her and truly understand her. Maxian noticed that she was tense. She mentioned out of the blue that she had assumed she had got out of her jail, but that this location was nothing more than a more elegant cage after arriving. She described to him how chaotic her life was. Maxian kept saying that she might shatter the peace by herself while attempting to console her. She tightened, and they silently consoled one another. The Duke desired to meet the mysterious woman, therefore he had sent guards to prepare the carriage for Count Cloet's residence. He took a firm stance on it. He was eager to meet her and learn more about her. He went in order to accomplish something and act upon the plan. In the living room, Louise was engrossed in a conversation with his childhood friend, whom she hadn't seen in years, and wishing him luck as he was about to leave. He asked her to write him a letter if anything happened. Louise promised to do so with a smile, grateful for the opportunity to stay in touch with her old friend. As they were saying their goodbyes, Reyard entered the room, catching Louise's friend off guard. He didn't know her childhood friend was such a grown man. Louise introduced his friend Maxian to her husband. When Maxian had to leave, he bid Reyard a friendly farewell, but there was unusual tension in Reyard's handshake. Reyard expressed his regret that it was unfortunate to see him leave so soon, said, and he hoped to invite him to a meal later. When he was about to leave, on his horse, screeching sound heard on the road. Reyard wondered if his wife had another guest. A carriage pulled up right in front of them. It was Maxian Commander Duke Lindemann who had come to get Maxian as it rained heavily earlier, and he was worried that it might rain again and he didn't want his dear subordinate to catch in downpour. Since he was nearby, hence he decided to bring a carriage over to fetch Maxian as he left on a horseback. It was evident to Louise that it would not rain again, but a person who didn't know how to read the weather wouldn't know that. Louise hoped he leave that place as early as possible because Reyard wouldn't like to know about the incident that happened in that old house. It would surely made him upset. Duke said to Louise that he saw her garden on the way down there and it looked so beautiful he would love to be invited next time to tour it. She got a little nervous and Reyard sensed that tension, so he jumped in between them. He said he would arrange a visit for his grace and bid him farewell. At the dining table, Reyard asked Louise why she would attract such ignorant people. Louise said Maxian was his childhood friend. But Reyard wasn't only worried about his friend, it was Duke Lindemann who came with him. He was the real problem. He didn't know how his wife and he came to know each other, but he was definitely insecure. Maxian was a knight with commoner background, and it didn't matter if he was her childhood friend as she was a noble now, and Reyard wanted her to act like one. Her eyes were welled up after realizing she was a commoner as well, and how Reyard gave her a new name and identity and asked her to forget her past identity as he didn't want people to look down on his wife. Louise said in a teary voice that how could he be embarrassed on her and Maxian and not about the entire mistress that he brought to home? That wasn't fair. Reyard gave her heinous look, but she agreed to stop meeting him if he didn't like him. Reyard said he wouldn't have said anything if he was just someone who would come and go. Then he proposed her an idea of finding someone with whom she could play just like he did with several mistresses. After all, she needs to relieve her stress somehow. Louise got shocked of what her husband had asked her to do. She trembled in fear as her wanted her have sex with some random stranger. She didn't want to fight and broke that peace, so she tried to calm her down and agreed to find a lover for her. A few days had passed since that incident, and she finally decided to reach out to Maxian, explaining her situation in the letter. His facial expressions changed as the content of the letter clearly affected him, and he got frustrated, and the commander who was sitting in front of him noticed his expression and asked, was there something that he didn't like in that letter? Maxian explained the situation of her friend to his commander, that her husband wanted his wife to find a lover for her, and she asked him where she could find one, whether a gigolo would suffice. The commander wondered whether she wasn't extrovert enough to find one in social circle. Maxian asked for the assistance of commander for the reply because he was struggling with certain words. Maxian didn't know how to respond to that, but he decided to suggest her to ignore her husband's request. Deep inside him was afraid that she would be ending up on back streets looking for a lover anyway. As she was more daring enough, the commander suggested, what about him then? He said he would be the lover of Lady Cloet. Later that day, a letter arrived in the mansion for Louise. Even she wasn't expecting an answer that quickly. She read the letter stating he was surprised to hear that she would be looking for a romantic partner all of a sudden. However, there was a well-known gigolo who was renowned for his services named Dolores. Perhaps he might satisfy her. Maxian asked the commander why he wanted to do that, to which he smiled and said he was bored. The commander and Maxian were having their conversation regarding their response in the letter. Maxian was confused. How can one pretend to be someone's lover just because he felt bored? Duke finished everything he had to sort with his fief and got back from the perils, so he decided to do a multi-level inspection on Cloet family, as he was intrigued about what kind of person Louise was. Maxian wasn't convinced, as it was still dangerous for his grace to investigate Cloet family while becoming a gigolo. Duke was certain that he can take care of himself. But the last time he went alone, he returned with a grave injury. That day, he purposely went outside with a traitor, as he knew that the traitor needed a sword dripping with his blood, as he had a sister who was hospitalized, and they would kill his soldier and his sister if he wouldn't stab Duke. Maxian was blaming himself for that instance, as it was oversight of his part as his subordinate. He didn't know how that traitor gets rid of the trackers that went after him. He should have killed him beforehand. Duke was far better than some gigolo from the back streets, so he asked Maxian to write her a letter, as he said. He said, "Dear Louise, There should be a famous gigolo named Elisan in the store called Dolores, and he might satisfy her. Louise felt strange that how his friend knew all about this. She thought that Maxian was gay as he didn't show any interest in women in the past, but she decided to pretend that she didn't know anything about it until he told her himself. She was worried whether she would be able to handle a lover or not. As the sun rose and set, the days continued to pass, but she didn't visit Dolores. Duke waited for her every day on the same spot, hoping to meet her there. He began to wonder why he was doing that for past few days, but suddenly he realized that he saw Louise 3 years ago in a banquet when she married Reyard. She was so pretty that every eye was on her, and people of high society were wondering about which family was she from as they didn't see her before. There in the banquet, she mistakenly took the decor as food, and everyone started to judge and laugh on her. But she got the attention of Duke there as he felt that there was someone interesting in the high society. As he gazed at her intently, he seemed intrigued by her at first, but soon he lost interest in her as she only attends balls and banquets as a mere ghost, and she hardly made any appearance in high society events. And when she did, she left as quietly as a shadow, as if she was a mere observer rather than an active participant in those parties. He made his mind that she was boring just like anybody else. She just didn't know how to conduct herself in the society. He'd forgotten about her since past few years, and there he was waiting for her in that shack. It was humorous how things worked themselves out. He was wondering what he would be doing if she didn't come this time. There a servant offered him some tea, and she wondered why His Grace was wearing a mask. Maybe he enjoyed strange plays like rumors were about him. But that wasn't the only rumor about him. Edward was someone who carried all sorts of humor on his tail. In fact, he never had a scandal with any noble despite his age also. He returned from the Peril Forest alive, and that proved his skill as well. People believed he used black magic, and his bedroom preferences were unbearable as he was traumatized by the women. As much he was respected and revered, Edward stood at the center of all sorts of rumors. He guessed the fact that he stayed at a brothel for the past few days, that too wearing a mask of all the things, and that would make their retelling more vivid. There was nothing to lose for him, as those rumors would make the Imperial faction lower their guards. Then suddenly someone drew the curtains off, which made him and his servant shocked as they weren't expecting any other visitor. It was Louise, and Edward smirked as his wait was over finally. Louise asked for where's the Empire best gigolo was. The other lady had a lot of questions to ask, but Edward said get out. He would like to handle things from there onwards. Edward decided to play with her by changing his voice and asked few questions to her. He said Cloyd is the family name of Count, so why was she cheating her husband? Or was she unable to find satisfaction from her husband? And if that was the case, then she had come to the right place. Louise blushed while saying she was there to ask him to be his lover. That sounded strange to Edward, as she didn't want her body. Instead, she wanted him to be her lover. To which he said what would he be getting from her proposal. Louise promised him a luxurious lifestyle so that he wouldn't need any other customer. Edward already had a luxurious lifestyle. He wanted something else. He leaned forward to ask what would he get, and at that moment Louise felt a feeling that she had already seen him somewhere. Louise said he would be getting everything that was in her reach. Edward smiled and removed his mask while accepting his offer. Louise immediately recognized him and apologized for her offense earlier. She decided to run off as she was ashamed and couldn't believe how she ended up meeting Duke Lindemann there. She was certain that she was on a right address that Maxian gave her. She realized suddenly and stopped. Whether Maxian and Duke planned this out? David held her hands and said she couldn't leave, as the fun is about to start. Duke suddenly grabbed Louise's hand from behind and whispered in her ears that the fun was about to start. Louise was taken aback and felt her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She hadn't expected such a bold move from him. Duke said she shouldn't raise her expectations that high, as he was a quite boring person in real life. Louise disagreed while saying that was something that she would decide. Duke leaned in close to Louise. His voice was barely above a whisper, and he said that someone like her in a brothel? That was quite strange. He didn't know that she had such interests. Louise's face turned bright red with embarrassment. She replied that she wasn't there for that. She only wanted to find a lover for her. Duke was shocked that why would anyone try to find a lover in a brothel? But anyway, he wanted to know her more, as he was intrigued about her personality. So he proposed whether he could be her lover. Louise thought, why would His Grace wanted to be her lover? He must be fooling around, but Duke was dead serious. It could be clearly visible in his eyes that he wasn't fooling around. Louise, with her twinkling eyes, looked into the eyes of David and agreed his proposal. She extended her hand and gave to him while saying, "Fine. Be my lover then." Duke leaned forward and kissed her hands and assured that he would serve her the best of his abilities. She felt as ecstatic as no other man had kissed her hand before. In the middle of the night, Louise was roaming in her mansion as she couldn't calm down at all. She decided to take a walk and get some fresh air. She was having thoughts about His Grace regarding why would he do that. She felt strange that the prince kissed her hand. It was Reyard who told her to do that, but still she felt like she did something wrong. As a married woman shouldn't be fooling around with other men. She felt like she was cheating on his husband. Well, she wasn't alone during those hours, her husband Reyard. He finished his work and the weather looked nice, so he decided to have a wine near the stairs and asked her whether she would like to join him. Louise adored the smile of his husband and recalled it was that smile which she had fell in love into. She was finding a way to go back as she didn't like the idea that her husband had proposed. She wanted to talk with him regarding her lover incident, but she didn't want to end their marriage as it was clearly written in the contract that the moment she tried to invade his personal space, their marriage would be terminated. She couldn't do anything to change her husband's mind, so she agreed to do what he said as it was the best solution. She kindly refused his offer and said she wants to spend some time alone in the garden, and she proceeded to walk. Hopefully her decision would be benefiting everyone. The next morning, Louise slammed a pile of documents on Duke's table. Even he wondered what they were. Those were the contracts that she prepared for her lover. Duke didn't understand what the need of those documents was, and did she even prepare them? She wasn't sure regarding what to do with her lover, so she ended up writing everything that came into her mind. For instance, they would not share anything among them, and there wouldn't be any intimate touches the way other husband and wives do. Duke laughed while saying she didn't have to worry, as that would not happen unless she asked for it to happen. If she wanted it, she could just let him know about it. Louise angrily said, "Your Grace," she wouldn't ask anything from him. Duke wasn't convinced, as in a romantic relationship, communication was the most important factor, not these contracts. But according to Louise, they weren't in a romantic relationship. Duke said the world called cheaters the scandalous people who abandon their partners but consider themselves in the romance of the century, and she asked him for cooperation. Louise agreed and made it certain that Duke was his fake lover. She wrote a contract with her husband as well, so it wasn't a big deal to make another contract with his fake lover. Duke wondered how contracts were such a trend these days. Anyway, he agreed to whatever she wanted, as he was certain that he would be more useful to her than just a gigolo. She didn't simply take in a lover. Duke was the capital's most famous person, Edward von Lindemann. She asked if he was that popular in the empire, then why he would do such things. He smiled and said just because he was bored and he felt like having some fun. He already had a lot of money, and apart from that he was also a prince, so he got tired of the women's eternal attention. Duke asked her to feel comfortable and honestly told him about what she exactly wanted from him, as this might become very important chess piece for him. He asked her if she needed more time to think through things. She could take as much time as she needed, and he would go through the papers in the meantime. While reading the documents, he observed they were mostly the similar with a few different clauses. It was written all over that the moment one party fell in love with other, the relationship would end. It was evident that she was looking for a non-romantic lover, as no love clause was repetitive. She was doing that on her husband's suggestion rather than her own will. Such a strange man Reyard was. She wanted her husband to feel what she had been feeling for quite a long time. She basically wanted to put her husband in her shoes. She recalled what her mother taught her: if it was a fight that she couldn't avoid, and then she should fight with everything that she had, because it was as important as a victory. Duke agreed to help her in that fight as he remembered that the Heliod family would be hosting a ball this weekend, and Liliana Heliod wasn't only a rising star in the society but also, she was a mistress who was involved with Reyard. Duke proposed an idea that she should make that place their first battlefield, and they should begin with their first step, which was fall in love with each other. Duke and Louise were having their conversation in the living room, and he proposed an idea to her that they should fall in love with each other. Louise got worried this time, and she already mentioned that would not be falling in love with each other at any cost, and if they did, then their relationship would end as per the contract. Louise thought that His Grace was fooling around her and doing this just out of curiosity, but this was a serious matter to her. She had endured a lot, and she desperately wanted to make her husband feel what she felt for more than 3 years. Duke apologized for his behavior, as that wasn't what he had meant, as wanted to propose an idea that they should act like they were in love in the ball, just to put out a show there for everyone. Louise was confused on how would she do that, as she didn't know how to pretend to be in love. Duke suggested that they would be writing a script for that. He suggested her idea that he read in a romantic novel long time ago. Louise genuinely liked that idea that they got from that romantic novel. She was more eager than he expected. He teased her while saying, was she expecting for such event to happen? There was definitely some chemistry between them. They decided to practice according to the script in front of a mirror, to make it less awkward for them. And just like that, she bid him a farewell and continued to walk towards her home. Duke found her really interesting woman. She was different from typical high society girls. Just then Maxian entered into the room of Duke Lindemann. His timing was impeccable, as he wanted to ask something from him, but he decided to hear his first, as he was intrigued what brought him there. He told His Grace that the Imperial faction has made their move, and they were preparing for a sword fighting competition. Their intent behind that move was to make Duke participate in that competition, as he succeeded in the patrol of Peril Forest. They were going to use that as an excuse of seeing his skills for themselves. Duke got annoyed by this scenario, as he just got back from the patrol and he just wanted a break for himself. Duke saw what the Emperor was thinking. He either wanted him to leave the capital or injure him badly. He was disappointed, as if they proceed to do that, it would take them forever to kill him. He made his mind of participating in that competition. Maxian explained him the rules, that he would be fighting for his life. The fight wouldn't stop until one surrender or die in the arena. The last one remaining would be declared as the winner. Knights from all the notable families of the Empire would gather there. The winner would be rewarded by the Sword of Lancia. The reward got the attention of Duke. The Emperor would be awarding that sword by himself to the winner. He wondered whether his half-brother went out of his mind, as he was offering the Imperial family treasure as a reward. Duke made his mind for taking sword lessons, as he didn't want his family treasure to end up in some stranger's hand. Duke was wondering who would teach him sword fighting in the capital, as Maxian wasn't good at teaching. Maxian suggested him about a person who was better than him, and he never won a single fight against that person. Duke was shocked to hear that, as Maxian became an officer just because of skills alone. Then how could he never won a single fight against that person? Duke felt strange, knowing there was someone that better than him. Duke made his mind to convince that person to be on his side. He would add immense support to his manpower, without a doubt. He asked Maxian to introduce himself to that person after the ball. He then asked why Louise had such unique taste. As she rejected his proposal of falling in love with him right to his face, he couldn't believe there was a woman in the world that could decline him. Maxian was confused, as knowing her friend, that was her normal reaction. He wondered whether she would be all right with Commander Edward. Reyard and Louise were in carriage, where she was thinking that Reyard withdrawn more and more from her ever since she visited Duke's mansion. She told Reyard that she went all that day to meet Maxian there, although he had a suspicion that she met someone else there. They arrived to the Heliod mansion. Miss Heliod ran towards Reyard to welcome him. Reyard thanked her for inviting him. Miss Heliod said there wasn't any need for that between them. They continued their conversation while ignoring Louise completely. Reyard asked Louise if she felt tired, then she could leave. This time Louise disagreed, as she prepared a surprise for her husband. Reyard felt strange, as Louise usually left all the parties before. He didn't bother that much, and just like that, he left her behind. People whispered that she ended up on her own the moment she got there, and what was the point of her coming to the ball when her husband's mistress was hosting it? Did she even have any pride? She felt so uncomfortable after hearing all those crowd gossips. Duke noticed everything and offered her a glass of wine while saying her husband disappeared quickly. She blushed and accepted the glass of wine. Duke asked whether she practiced the script or not. Louise replied there was no need to practice, so they decided to act upon their plan. Louise wondered if their plan would actually work or not, but Duke assured her to trust the plan and leave the rest to his amazing features. Louise sighs and dropped the glass of wine to get everyone's attention. When Reyard saw from where that sound came from, he saw Duke was not only holding the hands of Louise but also confronting her. The jealousy was crystal clear on Reyard's face. Duke was able to keep Lady Chloe safe because to his quick responses. However, he was worried that they would no longer be safe being around such individuals, these thousands of unknown people. He hoped Lady Chloe would not suffer any harm. Holding her hand, he expressed his true care as he brought her to safety by looking directly into her eyes. The nearness and intensity of his gaze startled Lady Chloe. Even though Duke was trying to act as casual as possible as they moved away from the danger, he could not help but feel tense between them. Still, Duke was glad Lady Chloe was safe and thought their strategy had worked well. As they made their exit, a soft, barely audible murmur permeated the air, gradually reaching the ears of the two individuals who had just left. Lady Chloe and Sir Edward, sensing the hushed whispers were about them, couldn't help but feel like the center of attention. The room was abuzz with discussions and speculations regarding their recent actions and who had received the most attention. The murmurs and whispers reverberated throughout the room, generating a palpable atmosphere of curiosity and intrigue. Despite the situation, Edward couldn't conceal his grin, feeling thoroughly pleased with himself and the attention they had attracted. After hearing the conversation, they thought it was their opportunity to act. Ensuring that all eyes were on them, they bowed swiftly and asked Chloe's permission to participate in the evening's first dance. Did he really ask Lady Chloe to dance as the murmurs grew? Count Chloe and Liliana watched everything unfold from a corner together, unable to decipher the meaning behind his request to dance. Lady Chloe swallowed at the gossip, but she bravely accepted his invitation to dance. People began making assumptions about the Duke and the woman's relationship. The Count was enraged at hearing such rumors and presumptions, and clouds of darkness began to loom over him. Everyone liked their fair amount of gossip because it was something they were all unfamiliar with, which made it even more fascinating. While everything was going on, Louise felt like a clown, delighting everyone with her antics as the two couples danced together. Duke reassured her that it will pass and that she should simply enjoy the attention she was receiving. He also mentioned that he enjoyed being the center of attention. He intended to give that his best performance. The Duke made note of the obvious intent as the romantic songs began to play. Louise was unable to comprehend. He clarified for her that romantic music gave the impression that they were very near to the onlookers. She turned to see whether the Duke had said anything, and sure enough, everyone was furious. He warned her not to focus on anyone but himself. While he was appearing more confident than she was, he was explaining to her that it was Louise who needed assistance. As he said this, he clenched her waist. She became agitated as he pulled her into his arms. Although embarrassing, the moments were romantic for the audience. Because they were so near to one another, they could hear each other's breathing while they enjoyed the sounds and sensations of the dance. She winced because she was finding it difficult to connect with the Duke, and he agreed that it was somewhat strange to dance. They continued walking while flushed. She questioned why he would feel that way about Louise when she thought of him acting strangely around her. He pulled her closer as they spun around in each other's arms, complimenting her on how well she maintained eye contact and carried on a polite conversation. She replied angrily, stating that just because someone can feel strange in a variety of situations doesn't imply that she isn't strange in his presence. Duke's gaze was fixed elsewhere. When she questioned about it, she said that the Count had been acting abnormally for some time. He informed her that she would find this issue particularly interesting. He was staring at them constantly, not sure if he was jealous or doubtful. That was what she had desired. At last, she caught Reyard's attention. Claps went up everywhere as they concluded the dance session, and everyone praised themselves. They wanted it to go to a higher level after the music ceased as the pinnacle of their achievement. She held her hand and nodded in agreement. Reyard was dragging Liliana along with him as he stormed out of the ballroom. Lily pleaded with him to slow down, but he wasn't feeling well. He was furious over how the Duke had managed to entice his wife, Louise. They were acting normally when they returned to the ballroom and wanted to repeat the entire thing. Lily requested to dance with her once more to the following song, but at that moment, all he could see and hear was Louise holding Duke's hand and the murmurs of those standing behind him. Louise departed with him, Duke, and was taken aback by her own actions. Reyard had trailed behind them. He could tell himself that Louise wasn't that kind of person, that she wouldn't act in such a way, and that she wouldn't hold Duke responsible for anything. Louise was still perplexed by the Count's situation. He circled around Louise's and Duke's last known whereabouts. He stood looking for the two of them. He turned to face them as he heard voices coming from the castle's balcony. Louise and the Duke together on the casquet by themselves, with Louise covered in the Duke's heavy, black overcoat. He winced. Reyard's eyes widened in disbelief as the Duke abruptly pulled Louise towards him and embraced her tightly. Count's muscles tensed up with anger, and he vowed to seek retribution by spending the night with Liliana, the Duke's beautiful mistress. Liliana, who was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, tried to say something, but before she could utter a word, Reyard grabbed her and planted a passionate kiss on her lips. He gave Duke a sidelong glance to make sure he was paying attention, but in the meantime, someone else had begun to plot. Louise, in a rare moment of peace, let her eyelids flutter shut in a gesture of profound reflection while the Duke fussed over the opulent fabric of his overcoat. She was acting so strangely that Edward felt compelled to ask, sincerely interested, what was going through her head. Confused by her sudden reaction, he was resolved to solve the riddle of her silent contemplation and yearned to delve into the deepest recesses of her inner universe. Because they were standing so near to each other to impart knowledge, Louise and Duke felt intimate. He took her head in his hands and snuggled her waist in. They questioned whether their appearance matched their perceived level of emotion. Louise gave a nod of approval, acknowledging that they had exerted sufficient effort. When they sniffed each other, Louise's scent reminded him of roses, while his smell made her think of something familiar, possibly some pricey oils that had been lingering for a while. He could clearly feel the utmost danger and perils. She recoiled in realization that they had been preoccupied with one another and had been missing the entire purpose of their reunion. She inquired about Reyard's responses and the situation below. She was worried about her husband's reaction and whether it would make him jealous. Perhaps after this, he would have a change of heart and begin to value her and her role in his life. Edward gave them a sidelong glance, uncertain whether her presumption would be confirmed. He observed them both, deeply engrossed in examining the other's mouths. They were both successful, but his actions were incomprehensible. Was he really that envious as to stage an entire play? Reyard put on this apparent performance in an attempt to control his wife. Lily felt pity for Louise since she kept tripping over other people's men. As Edward attempted to remove Louise from the situation, he assured her that he would always be available to help if she needed it in the near future, and that she should keep playing the parts and carry out their little escapade. Edward immediately sought Louise's permission as he intended to get revenge. When she replied, she wasn't sure what permission he was requesting, simply Fast's kiss on the hand, to be precise. She didn't know, but he had to because he could see what Reyard and Lily were doing below. Grabbing Louise's hand, he used his tongue to extract the glove and planted a kiss on her palms. Louise reddened during these moments, and her heart faltered as a mere kiss on her hand caused it to race. He squeezed her hand and she gasped. Moving toward the room, Reyard informed Lily that no matter how hurried he was, he could not force her to lie down in the grass. Edward exhaled a breath of relief as he watched the two of them go. She had felt as though if she had held on to him for just one more second, her heart would have broken. As soon as Edward realized how Louise was reacting, he chuckled and told her that he could count on one hand the number of women that disliked him. Louise answered to put her on that list. Edward scoffed and escorted her to the carriage. He wasn't lying, was Louise's impression as crown prince. He had been welcomed by all in the capital, but he began to turn down marriage proposals one after another for a reason that was unknown. The prince who waited for true love ended up being the subject of daily headlines as word of his story traveled throughout the empire. When Louise would ask her mother about the crown prince's appearance, her mother constantly replied that it was only a show to make the royals appear more beautiful than they actually were. She thought about her mother's statement and realized it was a lie. He was the only person, in her opinion, who could look as good as Reyard. She thought this was the only reason her husband had become frustrated and the plan could work. Louise had a smooth way with women, which made sense. He probably had a lot of experience with women because of the shape of his face. They were still formal with each other, but they were acting more like lovers now and could let go of the formality marked Edward to remove the casualty. The carriages arrived, and she traveled home in one that evening. She reflected back on the sequence of incidents that had befallen her. The maids told her in whispers when she got home that Reyard had been gone for days. Later that evening, when Louise came back, he gave her a big hug and a gentle pat on the back before telling her he was exhausted after a long day and that he wanted to go to bed. He headed toward his chamber without making a sound. Even though the plan had succeeded, nothing has changed. Reyard was acting in the same detached and indifferent manner toward her as he had in the past. Maxian was reading the news over here. The world still hadn't caught up with the story of Lady Louise and Duke Edward getting to know one another after they were spotted together for nearly 10 days. Given this information, Maxian questioned Louise's well-being. Maxian went straight to his commander Edward and rapped on his door. Edward could not hear Maxian's voice outside the door because he was in his room, lying in bed and immersed in his own thoughts, thinking about Louise and everything that had happened back then. He wondered if she had interest in him or not. Edward looked tired and as if someone had rejected him when he finally opened the door. He had a sneaking suspicion that Louise had lost contact with Louise after the controversy. But Maxian, who was directly acquainted with the situation, told him that he might not always be accepted and that rejection is a possibility. Edward mumbled to himself, wondering why his charm and presence were having no effect on Louise. The Duke was upset about it for a few days because he had never been rejected before, so this was really unusual for him. When he asked why Maxian was there after sharing his research findings with a swordsman trainer, he replied that he had a letter from Louise. Edward thought he wasn't rejected by Louise after all, and his eyes glistened with happiness. Furthermore, it wasn't as much as he had assumed. While Edward was eager to respond to Louise's letter as quickly as possible and asked for a pen, Maxian was curious as to what Louise had said. He scribbled on his paper, searching for the right words to express his feelings and to fit Louise's letter reply. He was attempting to be as reasonable as possible in his responses when she inquired if she could see him soon. He gave Maxian the instruction to deliver the letter to her as he finished writing it. Their last encounter took place in a well-known shop close to the town. Maxian did his best to follow Duke's instructions to go tell Louise about his predicament, but he is unsure of how Louise has responded. This time, he was expecting Maxian to have a proper conversation with Louise and was sending him to deliver his letter once more. Maxian appeared a bit uncomfortable about it. As Maxian mentioned that he believed the Duke and Louise had become closer, Louise beamingly smiled upon receiving the letter. She was startled as she suddenly recalled their first meeting, when Duke had taken off his disguise to reveal who he was. At the time, Maxian was dishonest with her and felt remorse for his actions. She was forgiving of him as she knew he had done everything out of concern that she would get into problems because he knew what she was into and that she was going too far. She conveyed to him a deep feeling that at one point in her past, she might have behaved in a way that prevented him from making a case for himself. Still, as she sat in meditation, she wondered if the gentle embrace of time and the warm temperature of life's stories had mellowed the edges of her cure. Maybe the days that passed, characterized by the industry's generosity and the soft touch of knowledge, had softened the fire within her. Thus, in her gift state, she found herself considering forgiveness, her heart less inclined toward retaliation and more receptive to the prospect of making amends. Before he left, she made an offer of tea. Maxian was worried to see Louise being untruthful to her and felt the need to reassure her that she was undoubtedly still powerful. When she was younger, her self-belief in her own strength had given her the confidence to feel strong and unstoppable. But as she met life's harsh realities, she came to understand that her supposed strength was insufficient to overcome the obstacles she faced. She no longer felt like the strong, self-assured person she always believed herself to be instead. The weight of her circumstances made her feel vulnerable and weak. Maxian, who had urged her to study swordsmanship, found it difficult to accept her newfound openness, which complicated his earlier advice. Since nobody knew about it, and it was her secret, Louise hurriedly and more anxiously glanced around to see whether anyone had heard him. She lost her opportunity to tell Reyard about it, and now he thinks she's just a regular person from the country. She hadn't even told Reyard about it. Our mother had previously advised her not to disclose this to anyone, and now that it had been confirmed after such a long time, everyone would likely make a big deal out of it. Since no one was aware of it, she was unable to instruct anyone and couldn't respond to the type of query. Maxian acknowledged the circumstances and offered his assistance should she require someone to practice swinging her sword against, even if it was just for a brief practice. With excitement, Louise accepted his offer. He had been residing in the commander's mansion, where there was a training area that was exclusive to a select group of people. Maxian offered to set that up so she could train. She enjoyed being trained. She won't be seen in this manner. She twitched, but she was happy too, and she wanted to know whether she could go there that day. Maxian had not brought the vehicles, so they rode the same horse together while they went to get a look at the ground and possibly train a little. He feared she would become the talk of the town once more and be featured in tabloid gossip. She believed there would be a better reason then, and she wanted Reyard to hear it. Maxian asked her if she was sure, not anticipating this kind of response from her. After continuing to ride, they eventually arrived at the location. Glancing around, she could see that everything was glitzy. She inquired if she might use one of the swords that were in the sword rack. He informed her that there was a better sword for her because the one she was eyeing was meant for beginners. She hadn't properly wielded a blade in 4 years. She paved the way, exhibiting her powerful yet feminist position. Maxian was aware that Louise was undervaluing herself, and she was stronger than ever. She requested Maxian for training gear since she could feel the intensity of the moment as she gripped her sword and wanted to dedicate herself fully to training right now. He assured her he had it and would bring it so he could let the commander know he was on his way. This allayed her fears because it proved that Maxian had a reason for having brought her there and that he remembered her skill with a blade. Maxian was caught off guard and was only able to respond, yes, when she inquired in a direct manner.